Hello everyone, my name is Paola Arletty, and as I have been walking around the garden this spring, I realized the Atlas roses by proven winners are looking especially beautiful this year, and I think it's because they've been in the ground for almost 2 full seasons, being that I planted them on July 4th, 2020. The Atlas roses came in 2-gallon sized containers, already bearing buds and blooms. As someone who had not started gardening until about 3.5 years ago, I didn't have any experience with roses or how to grow them. So this particular variety was intriguing to me because it is advertised as disease resistant, which is perfect because I didn't want a rose that required too much maintenance. In particular, I was also drawn to the beautiful peach blooms and the fact that they were to grow 2.5 feet to 3 feet tall and wide, perfect for our tiny garden. In addition to this, the rose is hardy down to -20 degrees Fahrenheit and suitable for zones 5 through 9. I'm in zone 7A, making this rose more likely to survive an out of the ordinary cold winter, being that I am 2 zones higher than the lowest zone this rose can grow in. So when selecting the very first plant we were to add to our garden when we started designing it, I completely ignored that I could have started with winter interest and foundation plants, like the Arborvitae and the boxwoods, which we did add later on. I started with the roses because I was completely in love with their color and I knew they would add beautiful summer interest. But actually, this rose starts blooming in spring and for us doesn't stop until the end of November. Now let's backtrack a little bit. When I first ordered them, I didn't take into account that we have a beautiful multi-trunk pine tree right in the center of our tiny garden. This tree casts quite a bit of shade, and so naturally this space does not receive as much sunlight as it could without the tree there. The roses actually want much more sun than they're receiving, and for this reason, I find the ones in the front yard are not as big or robust as the one I have planted in the backyard, which does receive mostly full sun. That's one of the observations I've made about this rose, is that it wants a whole lot of sun to perform as best as possible. I've also noticed that it's prolific in developing buds. I have roses all over this garden that have just over 4 and 5 buds per stem, which is incredible. The buds per stem don't all open at the same time. They'll start off with 1 or 2 blooms on that stem, and as those age, it seems like the others are about ready to open. So there's a succession of buds coming into bloom at all times with the Atlas roses. That's until the plant as a whole kind of slows down its bloom cycle until it picks up again in early summer. This makes the plant a great reblooming rose, and I haven't necessarily noticed the second flush of blooms and every other thereafter being weaker than the first one that arrived in spring. I have found that although the Atlas rose is a prolific bloomer, the blooms themselves don't seem to last more than a week and a half or 2 for us. I'm not really sure if it's the wind playing a big role on this, but I do find the petals on the ground more often than I would actually expect them to be. So is this a deal breaker? I don't necessarily think so because the blooms are very beautiful, but I do wish the blooms lasted a lot longer than they do. In terms of planting and general maintenance, we planted the roses using the provided guide by proven winners in a hole twice as wide and as deep as the pot. In each hole, we added biotone starter fertilizer, something I use with every new planting really. We left 3 feet between the center of one rose to the center of the next one, allowing them enough space and airflow to grow to their mature size. As for maintenance, we would water the roses by hand using our water hose as needed every other day during the first season in the ground. It is recommended the roots don't go dry during that critical first season though. Now we water them deeply once a week. A deep soak means holding the water wand directly around their root system for about a minute or two. I'm comfortable doing this because our soil is naturally very well draining, and if it rains a lot, we don't usually water at all that week. We fertilize using Spoma Rose-Tone fertilizer, usually on the first day of every month, beginning in early spring, but one application in early spring should be enough as well. In the fall of 2020, we planted over 800 tulips in this tiny garden space, right around the Atlas roses. They came up beautifully in the spring of 2021. But because they were so thickly planted, the Atlas roses did suffer from a huge aphid infestation. And unfortunately, when I discovered it, it was already too late because the roses were already suffering and the bud production was very low, as well as the foliage was not as thick as they were normally. When I walked around the garden, even while the tulips were still in their prime, I did notice this something on the roses. But because I didn't have exposure to aphids before, I didn't know what they were, so I kind of just brushed off what I saw. But then as the days passed and I noticed that this something was growing and was becoming more prevalent on each rose, I knew something was not right. And then I remembered that I had seen a similar looking thing on a YouTube video before, and I knew from that moment on that it must be an aphid problem. I treated the roses with an insecticide called Rose RX by Bonide, and I would apply this religiously every single day at dawn or very, very early in the morning, not during the hot scorching sun. Initially, I felt that the Rose RX insecticide did work and I wouldn't see any aphids, but then I would see some aphids come back, and then this lasted about a few weeks, if not a month entirely, before we were able to completely eliminate the aphid infestation. At this point, however, the roses were so terribly damaged by the aphid infestation that for the rest of the season, they did not perform for us. I have a huge feeling that because the tulip bulbs and the tulips in general were so thickly planted around them, that the lack of airflow must have caused the aphid infestation. Couple that with an overly wet spring in an area that is not full sun, these could be good reasons for aphids to have appeared in our garden. But I would highly recommend the Atlas roses, especially if you have a full sun location in your garden with sufficient airflow and proper well-draining soil. I hope my experience with the Atlas roses is helpful if you ever wondered how to grow them and how well they perform. Thank you so much for watching.